Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Gideon, and it's a pleasure to be welcoming Scott Cohen and Charles Caldas on stage. Charles Caldas is the CEO of Merlin, a licensing agency, and Scott Cohen is the founder and vice president of The Orchard, a digital distributor in the broadest sense. And I will, if I'm wrong here, then just correct me, but I would say where both your companies are similar is that, in a sense, you speak for many different rights holders, as, in that sense, aggregate their voice. And the difference is that where you negotiate deals only, you also distribute the content. So that is the basic difference, but they are both sitting in the very center of the digital ecosystem. So since the panel topic is just loosely termed in conversation with, that should be, I guess, the topic it should revolve around. And one question raised in the panel description was, should everything be for free? And so we might as well start with that question. And after all, the freemium premium debate has been ongoing the entire year. So maybe you could just, share your thoughts on that, especially because you see what comes in from freemium, what comes in from premium. I don't know, Charles, do you want to go first?
Sure. So, I think the one thing we have to learn in analysing the digital marketplace is that there's free and there's free and there's free. There's different layers of free and different places that free usage can take you. And even back in the physical marketplace, there was free music with people who just listened to the radio, who just listened to cassettes that their friends made for them. And there's always been some place in the ecosystem for free. I think the challenge we have now in the industry as we're looking towards the future is to say, well, which kinds of free usage lead consumers up a value path? And which kind of forms of free usage are just free for their own sake and have nothing extra to add? And how do you value those, and how do you build value around those? And obviously, the biggest challenge we all have globally on that is the way the legal system has evolved, and you have the DMCA in the US and the safe harbor provisions in Europe that basically make online platforms like YouTube not liable for what goes through their platforms. Is you've created this huge competitive advantage to the free part of the market, which the services that have got free and paid tiers have to compete with. So I think the whole question of free is much more complex than just saying, well, there's free and there's paid. And the encouraging thing is that there's clearly forms of free usage that take people up a value chain. And I think as an industry we want to see that kind of free usage win over free usage where there's tiny value.
I think that's actually really well put. I have to do a little disclaimer now, because The Orchard did this transaction with Sony, and Sony's not always thrilled with me going out and speaking, because sometimes I'm very free with my thoughts, and so anything I say is just my own personal thoughts and not a representation necessarily of The Orchard or what Sony believes. These are just my own thoughts that could be actually contradict company policy, I don't know, but probably will. But no, it's interesting about free too, because we get caught up in our world of things should be paid for, but then you think about how you operate, Does anyone ever use the internet? Should every website you go to, do you want to pay them? Because I'm sure they'd like to get paid, because they're not. As a music industry, we supply all these bloggers to review our records, and then they're not getting paid. They would say, wow, in the old day, I used to write for a magazine and they paid me a good salary. Now I get, 1 million people to read my review and I get no money. So I guess what I'm saying is, wherever we stand on it, on free, not free, upselling into the value chain, we should also be mindful of being internally consistent, that we can't say we need to get paid, but everyone else, we like the free internet. We all enjoy that. and we get lots of content without paying for it. So we just need to be careful, but actually completely agree with you. There's levels of free. There's not one type of free. But I also think we haven't built in enough of the paid models yet. You know, I was sitting in on the blockchain conversation earlier today, which I can tell most of you missed, but it was incredibly interesting. Hopefully you can watch the video of it. But a lot of the ideas coming in now around paying for content were the same conversations we were having 20-something years ago when the World Wide Web first started, because no one knew how anything would be monetized. How would anything be paid for? And back then it was all thinking about micropayments. You went onto the internet and you paid for every second you were on, and there was these notions of maybe every time you visit a web page there'll be some tiny micro deduction from your account that'll go to that person. And it's funny, 2 decades later, we're kind of back to that conversation again of maybe things don't need to be advertising supported or subscription or paid for in advance. Maybe there's other ways that it can still feel free, because if you just have some account and little bits come out of it all the time based on your usage, it's the way we use lots of things.
I mean, I think the only thing I'd add to that is, you know, the notion of giving something away should be a choice, not an obligation. And that, I think, applies whether you're a photographer or a musician or a writer, whatever creative endeavor you do. You can give things away to improve your profile, to reward your fans, to do, you know, all sorts of things. And I think the way the ecosystem has developed online is this still very challenging to apply that principle. So the better we get at applying that principle, and the better we get people to understand the principle that, you know, I can choose to give away my music to a blog, to SoundCloud, to whoever you may choose to give it to, can work in your favor. What, you know, I think we all have a problem with is people just taking something that's yours and making it available for free, and you having no control over where or how that's accessed. And you know, that I don't have the solution to that, but that, I think, is an illustration of the challenge.
Are you supposed to ask questions, or because we can just keep talking? Just so you know, we don't need you.
I will
we
chip
like
in.
you here.
I chip in, like, but just like in that case, just ignore me. Like, it's cool.
No, because
he's just here because he's young and handsome.
Yeah, Gideon, you give you bring the level of the panel way up. We went from 4s to 7s. Thanks. No. It's you know, thinking about it. You know, we had mentioned it earlier. Before the panel, you know, as an industry, we organize ourselves around the rights holders, you know, and, you know, the Orchard, Merlin, we represent rights holders. But as a whole industry, we've built our business around rights holders rather than the consumer. And, you know, you could make an argument that that's why we're struggling so much still 2 decades into the internet revolution, and you look at other industries that build products and services with the consumer at the center of their business, and how much more successful they are. And, you know, maybe should I just keep talking?
Yeah, could you maybe give an example of such, you know, what would be a consumer-focused approach?
So think of, like, you've heard of the term gamification, which comes from the gaming industry, which has to do with with 2 things. One is game design, but also game theory. This notion of when you play a game, so it doesn't matter whether it's a video game like Farmville or Candy Crush, or a shooter game, or a board game, or a sport, but when you play a game, you're the center of the game. Every player, you're at the center of it, and it unfolds around you, right? These lead to great consumer experiences. Versus being told, this is how you must play, these are the rules, and the rules are the same for everyone, and the experience is the same for everyone. And this is where I think we kind of narrow it, because again, as rights holders, we're trying to monetize our rights, protect our rights, and I understand why we do it, but at the end of the day, the consumer is constrained because they want to be at the center of it and do everything they want, and you can look at a service like Spotify and you could say that's the beginning of it, that everyone that has a Spotify account, it's unique to them. The playlists that they create, the people they follow, the music they listen to, they're deciding how they do it and how they want it. But could we take that 2 or 3 or 4 steps further and really embed that into people and build a system around that rather than, we don't want you doing that with our track. We don't want you giving it to that person. This one, we don't have the rights in that territory. This you can't do. This you have to pay more for. This we're holding back. This is an exclusive there, not here. And so that actually disadvantages the user.
Have you suggested stuff like that to your clients, to the rights holders you represent? Do they think along the same lines, or is this?
No.
Well, I think yes and no. I mean, I think that the independent sector as a whole is much more adventurous and much more creative in terms of how it interacts with the emerging spaces. And I think what Scott describes about Spotify is right. I mean, this is, you can think about it in all sorts of ways. You used to walk into a mega store or a record store, and if you were into Norwegian death metal or free jazz, you still had to walk past Celine Dion and Britney Spears and all of the stuff getting thrown at you to get to where you wanted to get to. Now you can use any of these online subscription platforms to just go directly to free jazz, create your own environment, be at the center of it, and it's very different. And the democratization of access has been really great for independent labels, and we've done incredibly well in the streaming space. I think the tension is, and this is talking about building your business around the rights holders, is the major labels are the dominant players in this space. And we've essentially now got 2 major labels. We've got 2 rights holders that control the entire market. They make the decision on how services work, where the value flows, what consumers are allowed to do. And I think that's a large part of what's broken about our industry at the moment, is the fact that all of this power is concentrated in the hands of 2 companies that are not really trying to increase the pleasure of the experience for the consumer. They're trying to protect a business model where they used to control all of these channels. They love the fact that you had to walk past Celine Dion and you heard that on the radio and you saw that on the television and you got bombarded with that 4 times an hour. They've gone from that world to a world where you can't control a person anymore. They can do whatever they like. And I think that tension is really at the heart of a lot of the issues we see now.
But I do see, just as a positive example where we're starting to bend to the consumer. So one of the things that again, to use Spotify as an example, that they recognized was a new generation of people and how they search for music. Because I'm looking around, we're all, I might be the older end, but all of us started, in music, understanding what genre of music you like. Do you like rock or do you like classical? So we search for artists and tracks and albums and genres. But there's an entire generation of kids that don't search for music that way. They type in hangover. What kind of music should I listen to on Saturday morning because I have a hangover? And playlists come up and it hopefully matches, well, we know what kind of music you've been listening to, but this is good music for that. Or, the most popular search term on Spotify was running. Well, there's no artist I know named Running or it was just running. And so now what we start to see is, okay, if people are searching on mood and emotion and activities, then are we creating stuff for those people? And so now you see lots of people creating for a new way that people want their music. They don't want it by genre. They want to feel happy right now. They want to feel, calm. Sleep is another big one. People listen to music to go to sleep. So what should that playlist be? Probably not death metal. But they're not going to say, I want easy listening or I want smooth jazz. They just want sleep.
You said or you mentioned the difference in the free sector that you have to differentiate, and that putting your music out there, because I mean, one argument you always hear from is still that YouTube is indispensable because it's such a great promotion platform and everybody uses it. And I mean, you use it as well, or you licensed it. Like, what is behind such a decision?
I mean, I think YouTube's a classic example it's a classic example of all sorts of things, but about talking about what I was about before is, the law protects YouTube to a point where they can, and they started their business by being able to put anything they wanted on their platform without any respect to anyone's copyright. And, gradually over the years, they've created systems, and they've done things to give you greater control over how your access is there. I think the tension is, though, that this is the platform where the most music listening happens in the world. There's more consumption on YouTube of music than anywhere else, yet it pays the least amount of money. And that in itself, I think, is a really key sort of tension in this whole argument. It's a great platform to reach people. It's a great way to create a presence, to create a visual presence, to engage with people. There's all of these amazing things you can do on a platform like that. But, I think to your question as to why we license that, I think we license that in some ways because you have no choice. Because if you don't license it, you have no control over where your music goes. And this is what I said earlier about choice is really important. I think giving rights holders better choice in what and how they feature things has actually increased the value of usage on YouTube. It's still way below what I think it should be. But, it needs to be, all of those forms of consumption need to balance that creative potential and that audience potential with something sustainable. And I don't think that YouTube is that.
Like the other service where you can actually choose to put your stuff out there for free is SoundCloud, as we also mentioned. And I don't know, it's like, for example, this comment function, which I find highly entertaining on SoundCloud. Is that like part of the gamification you were talking about?
Which function?
You can just put comments at any point of the sound file.
Yeah, I guess you could call that. But
like, what I'm trying to say is that SoundCloud has come under scrutiny, and I don't know, artists have surprisingly found out that the catalog has been pulled or whatever, and
SoundCloud's it's a tricky one because we all love it and we all hate it. Everyone I know uses SoundCloud. It's amazing for putting stuff up, to do private. You need to share a song easily, or if you want to break something and you put it out and get it discovered, all that's great, but the economics don't work.
Yeah, that's the question.
So we're all left with, yeah, it's great, but if there's no money in it, why should we be doing that?
But would it hurt? I mean, the question in the panel description is, should everything be for free? We could also ask, should every service be monetized, every single one? Or couldn't there be one that has just, established itself as this wonderful promotional platform that could just be left out there?
I think yes, but it's that choice thing again, right? And I think the frustration on the rights holder side with SoundCloud is for all of the positive uses of it and all of the things Scott's describing. People can upload your entire catalogue without your permission, and it's very hard to control that, or very hard to do anything about that. You might have a strategy about how you're presenting yourself to the world that all of a sudden gets knocked over because someone's just put your entire album up there for free and you don't have effective tools to take it down. I mean, we'd license SoundCloud specifically for that reason. On the one hand, to create a way that you can choose what you give away and choose what you monetize. But on the other hand, also a better way to give you the tools to shape the experience that the consumers of SoundCloud are having of your music, so that you have a broader, better picture of how that service works for you.
But again, even if you talk about free, what you mean is two people in the value chain aren't exchanging value. So the customer's not paying for it in any way, not even by watching advertising or anything. And the rights holders aren't getting remunerated. But it doesn't mean there's not transactions happening. Things are happening on servers, Google's indexing, anyone that uses it, I don't know if this is the point of the conversation, but Amazon Web Services is now the largest server company in the world. But it's great. They offer this service to everyone, and people use them for their hosting. But then they watch what's happening on it so they can catch trends and what people are doing. And so they're monetizing it in different ways. So somebody's making money off of that. So even if it's free music, somebody's making money off of it. Why aren't we getting remunerated for that?
Yeah, well, SoundCloud's made $160 million out of that recently.
Right.
And I think that those are the sort of tensions you get. And I mean, this goes all the way back to Last FM, right, which is a platform that paid nobody, was full of music, sold the company for $280 million, tried to license it, and licensed itself out of existence. So,
But the founders all did very well for themselves.
Well, they certainly did better than the musicians who put their music.
Yeah, no.
Music wasn't
So again, it sounds like an old debate, though, in a weird way. But I think we're getting to the point in the music industry where it's time to kind of grow up. It's not that people aren't used to paying. If you have one of these, you pay for it, right? And you pay. We pay. Now we need to kind of layer in more of it. It's great news that you have subscription services now, that it's taking off. It's great that you have ad-supported. It's great that you have people that want to get a physical product or people that want to download a song. There's lots of ways that music can be monetized, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be celebrating it. I actually think we could use more business models, not fewer. I think always you want to be in front of where the customer is, and right now they're in places like social media, like Facebook, but increasingly they're in messaging apps, and they want to be able to share music with their friends and do things. I think we need to be in those in a much more meaningful way. We're still thinking people are going to have some activity over here, pull out, and then go over here and have music, when people like music integrated into their lives. It's always been that way. You go to a club, you're drinking, you're listening to music, you're being with friends, it's all in one place. So why does our experience have to be different?
You both mentioned that your business focuses around the rights holders, and no doubt the exploitation of those rights is the main part, I guess. But there's revenue around those rights, which isn't really looked at or taken into account at the moment. Like another buzzword, besides freemium, premium this year was where the breakage is. Could you maybe explain what that is? Because it sounds, and correct me again if I'm wrong, it sounds breakage was from the physical age a basically advance fee for anything that broke in the physical product. I guess that's where the name comes from. Why do we even have that in the digital age?
Well, look, I mean, I think this could be a very long answer, but let's try.
Go back. Explain what breakage means.
Yeah. So in the physical world, breakage was literally what Gideon said. So you would have a provision for when the truck driver was in a bad mood and threw the box of records off the back of the truck, and two of them cracked. You would build those provisions in, because the retailer would then ring up the record company and say the truck driver was drunk again and he dropped the box, and so you didn't have to pay royalties on those records that actually broke, which is a legitimate thing. In the digital world, it's really used to describe any money that's not attributable to the actual use of the repertoire. And the simplest way to describe the easiest form of breakage are advances. So if a digital service comes into the market and wants to do a deal with Universal Music, and they say, okay, part of the cost of doing this deal is you have to pay us $2 million today in advance for all of the usage of our music over the next 12 months. if at the end of 12 months the royalties generated are only 50% of the $2 million, so you've only generated $1 million in royalties, that $1 million is sitting there supposedly unattributable, because it's saying, well, hold on, it's in the bank, but there's no usage attached to it. And the unfortunate thing is as the major record labels realise that in the digital space, with all of these VCs coming into the door and all these people with rich pocketbooks who are looking to start services, were willing to pay these kind of upfront monies, they realised that there was an inherent value in that. I think that habit of taking that money and putting it straight into your bottom line to bolster your profitability has been one of the most destructive forces in the evolution of the digital space. And what it's done is it's to use an economic term, it's totally misaligned the incentives. So the incentives should be, if you get into business with someone, to say, okay, look, if you want to sell my product, I'm going to give you my product in the best possible condition so that you can sell as many of them as possible and we'll both make money. The way the breakage model works, it says, well, if you want to sell my product, you've got to pay me more than what that product is worth up front. And if you don't sell it all at the end of the year, bad luck. And by the way, if you want to go to the second year, that $2 million has now become $3 million. And it's just become a bad habit. And what it rewards is not the value of the music that you've put into that. It rewards how powerful you are as a company and how much you can extract from these people up front. And I think, from where we sit representing independents, one of the biggest battles Merlin has faced is to get our labels to understand that when you look at the contracts on a digital deal, it might say that your revenue share is going to be 55% of what comes through the pipe. But the reality is, for the biggest record companies, it's not just the 55%, it's the 55% plus everything else. So a lot of value gets sucked up to the top of the food chain, which makes the bottom of the food chain harder to sustain. And I think that the other thing it rewards is inflating market share. Those of you who follow the press and who've been reading, particularly in the US, the efforts of the American Association of Independent Music to actually start recording market share by ownership, which is actually saying how much value is in the independent sector by what's actually created by independent labels, not by who their distributor is, really illustrates that. Independent market share between distribution and ownership goes from something like 18% to 32%. The value gap in there is being used by those major label-owned distributors to suck value out of or the major labels via their distributors to suck value out of the independent sector into their own businesses, leaving a value gap. So, as I said, I could go on about that, but that's my explanation of it.
So again, Charles brought up the Last FM, and this was really what kind of kick-started this. It was the idea that everyone licensed their music, thought it was fair, and then they turned around and sold the company, and everyone made money on the backs of the record companies. And that was that's it, fuck you. Anyone wants to open a service, I want a minimum guarantee, I want an advance, I might want equity as well. That way, if you do really well off the backs of our artists and catalogs, we'll benefit too. So it came from that space. Maybe it's been bastardized a bit, and it's moving down the path. And I actually think maybe it's even gone too far, because when you think about the digital music services and the relationship with us as the rights holders, it is incredibly fragile. Which one of the digital music services is profitable? Well, we've had them for 20 years. Has there ever been one that's profitable? How fragile is that? If tomorrow the investors in Spotify say, you know what, we're pulling the plug, we're done, we're out. Or iTunes says, fuck it, Apple says, we're just not in the content business anymore, we're shutting down. We're driving these services really hard, we're really riding them hard, but none of them are turning a profit. This could end in a really bad way if we're not working a little closer to enable them to succeed, you know? Because why are we battling each other when the value's with the end customer? We should be doing things around them. And even as an industry, you know, why are we having artists, you know, say stupid shit about how much money they make or don't make in the digital world, and they don't know what they're talking about, and it's taken out of context, and then it's printed, and then it's all this stupid shit that just hurts us rather than creating this amazing ecosystem. I mean, I've never seen, like, in, you know, the movie industry or television, you know, some actress from the 1980s that won an award back then talking about what she thinks of Netflix, and then it gets printed, and like, who the fuck cares, you know? But we'll do that if an artist from the 80s has something to say about what they think of Pandora royalty rates in America.
Yeah.
Do you want to hit?
No, I mean, I think that the most recent illustration of that is, you know, I think most of you know Deezer, which is the French streaming service, went to list on the stock market this week and failed. And they published, there's some public documents you can go and see online. And one of the, you know, the most concerning lines in there was unrecouped payments to the major record labels that were just sitting there openly now because they have to expose that to the market. So if you think about, you know, what Scott's saying about profitability, it's very, very hard to be a profitable company if you're paying out more than you're making. In fact, it's technically impossible. So if you're actually paying rights holders more than what you're making, you're not going to survive. Unfortunately, the industry is incentivized. You know, and I think we're living in a market where there's a duopoly. There's two companies that actually control the entire shape of the music business. And we see in our world all sorts of positive stories for independence and all sorts of great possibilities in the future. But if we continue to let that dynamic dictate the shape of the market, so that we see more of these Deezer examples where companies are struggling to justify their business model because they've paid out more money than what they actually make, you know, it really distorts the market, not just between the major record label and the service, but also for the labels who might be distributed by that major record label who are not seeing that money. If you're distributed by a major record label or by a major record label owned distributor like The Orchard, I don't think the corporate parents are going to be handing out millions of dollars in bonuses down the line to keep the artists happy and keep them in business. You know, these are big corporate entities, they're public companies, they have responsibilities to shareholders, and at the moment the only way they seem to be able to keep the shareholders happy is by pulling out more of the market than they should be pulling out. You know, and I do think that this is something that is a huge issue. The positive side of this is that the longer the market is in existence and the longer services like Spotify and Apple continue to grow into this space, the more data they have within their own businesses. And I think there's really going to be a point where one of these retailers has enough power, and I think we're getting close to that point now where, you know, I mean, by our reckoning, Spotify must be paying out close to $100 million a month in revenues to the record industry, actually possibly over $100 million a month now, just to the master rights owners. There's a point at which that check becomes significant enough within those big companies' businesses that they can't turn it away. And then there's also a moment where Spotify is going to be able to say, well, listen, if you want to keep getting this $110 million or $150 million a month, we're not going to support a system anymore where you're sucking out this extra value. The service is what it is, compete within the service, do the best that you can, and, you know, congratulations if you do well. You know, that is the end game that hopefully deals with all of this.
You know, it's funny because in one way, this conversation, we didn't know what direction it would go. Seems kind of dark and negative, but the truth of the matter is the music industry is the shining light of the digital industry. You know, we're the success stories. You know, we're the ones actually doing it better than, you know. Would you want to be in, you know, the magazine business? You know, we're doing really good. We're not all the way there yet. We actually have a long way to go, but you can start to see where it's heading, and it is in a nice place. I mean, digital in most major markets has overtaken physical. No one ever talks about, the cost savings that we've had in this digital switch. I mean, it used to be so expensive to be in the music business. You used to have regional reps supplying stores to make records was so expensive. Everything was expensive and time consuming, and now we've actually become quite free and nimble, and it's actually a nice time. I think we're right at the beginning of a real golden era. And I saw a premiere of a movie. It's coming out next week. Did anyone read the book Kill Your Friends? Oh, all right. So if you haven't read the book, you can skip it. Even though it's a great book, go straight to the movie. That's really the music industry at its best. It's kind of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I highly recommend it. It's a good. It's our movie.
It's not. I don't know. Maybe I didn't find that it's dark or anything, because I just know from myself. Whenever I went to these conferences and I heard these topics being raised and everything, I always just ask myself, like, yeah, but when it's going to happen? What are we going to do? Like with the blockchain thing, the same thing. It's the most amazing technology I've ever heard about, and I think everybody who spends time studying it a bit will agree. And then my incentive would be to go, okay, so when do we get on there or whatever? But it's probably more like these kind of revolutions. They probably just take time, and we're absolutely in the middle of it.
Yeah, look, change is difficult, in any industry, and the change that the music industry is going into is not only changes in formats, it's actually changes in consumer behaviour, it's changes in the way people search for music, it's learning how to adapt your whole business model to these new dynamics. So, I think I'm responsible for some of the darkness here, so I'll talk about some of the better
lighten
stuff.
up, man.
Yeah. We do this annual survey of our members around the world, and when we publish it. And the thing that really amazed me this year is, despite what are really challenging times, for the first time, for the majority of the people who responded to this, digital is now their number one revenue stream and growing substantially. For a third of those people, streaming has overtaken downloads as the primary form of revenue. The one that blew me away is that 60% of all of the companies we surveyed, overall business had grown by more than 10% in the last year. So we're sitting here talking about challenges. In the meantime, in the corner, there's a substantial part of the independent sector whose businesses are growing year on year and are not complaining. They're looking forward as to how can you deal with this. And then the final statistic on that was, we always do what we call an optimism measure every year, which is, is your glass half empty or is your glass half full? And this year, 86% of the people, we represent who responded to that survey, which was hundreds of companies, I think from 26 countries around the world, 86% of people said that they were positive about the future of their business. So the lights are there, the growth is there. We have, for the first time in memory, one part of the music ecosystem that is showing the most extraordinary level of growth. And within that economic growth, also showing growth in possibilities and the ability to be creative and the ability to reach fans in a whole different way. That I think is what we all have to reach for. And to me, that's the optimistic part of this. Is we'll ride the challenges. It's making sure we can get to that goal as quickly as possible.
Yeah, if you think about for our industry, who here uses Facebook or Instagram, or has an iPhone, or has ever been on YouTube or Spotify, or downloaded an app, all the things that our business is now based on. Every example I just gave didn't exist 10 years ago. Not even 10 years, none of them. And even when they did exist, some of them only existed very recently. We have adapted incredibly quickly and embraced all of those. Imagine another industry that had that kind of change. I can tell you one, because a few years ago at MEDEM, when the guy from Kodak showed up to talk about, you remember Kodak? Remember film? No? Yeah. And he got up in front of a crowd. This is already a few years ago, and said, "Who bought a roll of film this month?" Nobody. And he was like, "Yeah, 5 years ago, our film business was something like, I forgot what it was, an astronomical number, much bigger than the music industry ever was. I forgot how many billions in just little rolls of film, and within 5 years, it had gone to almost nothing. It just poof." They didn't adapt to the digital change at all, and they got wiped away. The music industry actually, to give us props, we're the beacon. We actually have all the success stories. Anyone hear the new Adele song? What did you turn on your radio and wait for it to come on? Or did you go to YouTube or Spotify and you listen to it digitally right then when you were ready because all your friends said, "Hey, check out the new track"? We're completely comfortable as an industry moving through. We just have a few little challenges but that's what keeps it interesting.
Feels very warm now.
Yeah, see, we lightened it up. We're going to hug after this.
Does anybody have any questions? Because we have maybe 3 more minutes. Yes, please.
Thanks. I was wondering what you guys, one thing that you didn't speak about was Apple Music, and what are your views on, like, they've come in for a lot of criticism over the launch, and how they kind of, it was rumored that they rubbished the Spotify freemium offering. There was a lot of criticism, and people like Jimmy Iovine were, criticizing Spotify without calling them out in name. I was wondering what you guys thought of how they've launched the product, and there's been a lot of negativity around it, but just Apple Music.
Look, I think Apple Music's a beautiful example of what Scott talks about, the industry being led by the rights holders. So Jimmy Iovine's a long-term major label executive who knew what was music to the ears of Doug Morris and Lucian Grange and sang that particular song. I think sorry, I'm going to get dark again for a second. What I described earlier about the major labels desperately seeking to regain control of the channels, in some ways was the song that Jimmy Iovine was singing. It's like, no, we're not going to have all of this free for all, where all these consumers can go everywhere and listen to everything for free. We're going to put you back into channels. We're going to create a radio station again, and we're going to pull you in. Having said all that, that's what all the criticism is about, right? So you're trying to apply old world thinking to a new world model. I think the optimistic side of that is Apple's a pretty smart company, and I think they're very good at what they do, and they'll evolve and adapt, and in some ways, whatever the noise was around, whether Jimmy Iovine was an out of touch executive or a visionary or neither, and that the service is just going to do what it does, is what will ultimately prove it. I think the interesting thing from where we sit is it seems like an example of a rising tide lifting all boats. So the fact that a company like Apple's come in and invested seriously in this part of the market has seemingly increased the growth rate of the other services that sit around it. And if we can keep doing that, then bring on more people we can criticise, because I don't care how dumb you are, if you're going to create that much noise around the market that actually lifts the value of the overall market, that's what we should focus on in that instance, I think.
That's good. I'll leave it with that.
Any more questions?
You spoke about YouTube, but you didn't speak about YouTube Red. I'd be interested in hearing both of your thoughts on their new subscription service.
Two political ones that makes it challenging for me to answer. Anyway, I think what both of them, both the Apple and the YouTube illustrate is, just because you were big in one thing with one business model is not a guarantee that magically overnight you flip a switch, everyone's going to come running to your new model. So maybe they'll succeed in it, but it's not a guarantee. People go, oh, it's Google and it's Apple, they're the biggest. Of course, anything they do works. But we're starting to learn very quickly, no, it doesn't. And I don't know whether they'll succeed or not, Apple or YouTube, but there may be somebody else that does similar models that does succeed in that, is my point. But I'm just trying to not be too controversial here, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. I don't think it's making that big of an impact. I don't think people care. And I don't think they're going to change behavior that drastically, that quickly. It would be as all of a sudden, Facebook said to you, okay, well, if you just pay me, we'll take ads out. Would you still use it as much? People already have it imprinted in their mind that this is how we use this service. It'll be very hard to transition. Whereas Netflix started, this is how you use the service. Okay, that's how we'll use that one, So it's very hard to convert that behavior, that consumer behavior, into a new business model once you're already in. Sometimes it's easier to start outside.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to use, Scott's been asking the audience a lot of questions, so I'll ask you a question to answer your question, which is, how many of you have had your credit card in your hand when you've been on YouTube? So that's my answer.
Do we have time for one last question, if there is any here, maybe?
How happy are you with the direction the European copyright reform is going, since you said that traditionally all your services are built around the copyright and not the consumer?
Sorry, I think I didn't quite hear that, but is that the question about where the copyright review process in Europe's going?
Yes, how happy are you with that?
I mean, we're probably too simple to be involved in that to any great degree. But I think that the most interesting part of the review of copyright now is obviously around, the length of term, and I think that's a big deal now given the level of maturity of the market. For me, the most important thing is the safe harbour provisions and having that review to a point where they actually perform the function they were meant to perform, which is to protect people from what went through their pipes, not become a free entry point into growing businesses. To me, that's sort of the two highlights. I don't know if you have.
More important than the copyright, I also think, is the safe harbor. The notion that anything can go through the digital pipes, and you're not responsible. If somebody tells you you've got something illegal, you pull it down. Fair enough when they wrote that 20 years ago. But now, if your whole business is predicated on, I know exactly what's going through the pipe, that's how I sell advertising, that's how I make money, that's how I've built whole algorithms, I know everything that's going through the pipe, you can't then claim safe harbor. You can't have it both ways. It's not like the electric company doesn't know that the electricity is being used for these lights. It just doesn't know that. So they would have safe harbor. But YouTube, Google, they know exactly what's going through their pipes. So they shouldn't have safe harbor. Once we say, this is one of ours, every time you see it, block it, do something, whatever we ask you to do. We shouldn't have to remind them every day, millions and millions of times a day.
All right. If there aren't any more questions, I'd say we wrap this up. Thanks a lot, Scott. Thanks a lot, Charles.
Thank you.
Thank you.